Ray,
Yeah.
do you know what autistic is?
Yeah.
You know that word?
Yeah.
Are you autistic?
I don't think so. No. Definitely not.
What do you think about us sitting here talking about Rain Man 15 years after the movie came out?
It's almost not quite 15 years. It's next year's the 15th anniversary, so.
You know what the date will be?
Yeah, December. It's opened in theaters on December 16th, 1988. When we went to the. So it'll be December 2003. Will be the actual 15th anniversary of its release, right? By United Artists.
The word autism really means living in a world of one's own. They seem to be isolated from the world and from people by some kind of an invisible shell or glass wall of some sort that is very difficult to penetrate.
The word savant, which is used in some cases for people with autism who have unusual skills, comes from the French word which means smart or wise. It used to be called idiot savant, which is an offensive word. Now it's not politically correct, so people say savant. It means somebody who otherwise has some kind of mental incapacity, some kind of mental or cognitive incompetence, but yet has these unusual skills. There are a lot of people who are very smart who are not autistic, but those with autism who have these skills are called autistic savants now.
For many decades, the mothers were blamed for causing autism. It was thought to have no physical basis. It was strictly emotional. The mothers were referred to as refrigerator mothers who lacked the emotional rapport with the child that a normal mother would have. And she just sort of attended to the kid's needs in a very cold and detached way and supposedly gave the child the idea that she really didn't love him or care for him, and that drove the child to choose to become autistic, according to psychoanalytic theory.
There has probably been no profession in the history of medicine that's done so much damage to so much people in such a cruel way as that theory. And it was only a theory.
We know now that this is an inborn wiring problem. It's probably a neurological problem that's expressed behaviorally, that has symptoms in the social sphere, that it's not the fault of parents, it's not the result of bad parenting. I think this has been the biggest change in how autism is conceptualized.
Was I trying to say Raymond and it came out Rain Man?
Yeah. Funny Rain Man.
You? You're the Rain Man?
There is a road that preceded the juncture at which Rain Man began, and that was my friendship with a man named Bill, who I met just out of college. He was mentally retarded, and we became friends. I sort of guided him along life's path until he died about a dozen years later. But that introduced me to the whole world of developmental disabilities and just underdogs. And after Bill died, I just decided to continue to volunteer a little time each year to those various organizations. It was at one of those fortuitous conferences I attended that someone tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around and faced Rain Man, not knowing people existed who had encyclopedic memories and interests in obscure areas and just all the wondrous, crazy nonsense that a savant brings to your life. He dumped on me right then and there, and I knew that I wasn't done writing about people with disabilities. I was just beginning.
Savant syndrome is realistic enough in its own right. It's so spectacular in its own right that you don't have to embellish and you don't have to add anything. And so all of the skills and all of the scenes that you see in Rain Man are based on some real live person. It's not some movie writer's fantasy. It's not about a single savant, it's a composite savant.
Well, I had referred Dustin to a number of individuals, autistic men, young men, who I thought would be ideal role models for him, including Joseph Sullivan and Peter Guthrie, who became his main role models.
Would you be interested in doing some mathematical equations with us?
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you what 97 times 54 is.
5238.
Correct. 64 times 36.
Is 2304.
Correct. 78 times 187.
78. 14586.
Correct. Peter, let me ask you a question. Can you tell me how many number one hits Rod Stewart has had?
4 of them, right?
Can you tell me the years?
Maggie May, 1971. Tonight's Not Gonna Be Alright, 1976. We spent 8 weeks at number one at the end of 76, right? And Do You Think I'm Sexy in February and March of 79. And then All for Love with Brian Adams, Sting in 1994. That same year, he was inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So,
Peter's like many, autistic savants or other folks who have a particular thing with calendars, and basically have perpetual calendars logged into their head. And so Peter's always been able to tell you what day of the week, a particular date fell on.
If I gave you my birthday, could you tell me what the day was?
yeah.
I was born December 17th, 1965.
It was a Friday. Top of the charts was Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds.
Peter's way is to be very literal. He is not, he's just literal to the extreme. And so he's very interested in things that are very quantifiable or very hierarchical. So sports is a great one. I mean, he's a huge sports fan.
Do you know a lot of bowlers?
Marshall Holman, right? There's Parker Bone III. Yeah, that's a left-handed bowler, right?
Yeah.
I did have a picture of him back in 1994, after the Tragedy Open 8 years ago, right? Kevin and I went, right?
Do you know how many titles Parker Bone holds?
About 28 titles, right?
What about Brian Voss?
Yeah, just won another title a couple of weeks ago. He has 22, I think. Just won another title back a couple of weeks ago. He just won another title, right?
That's fantastic. And who has the most titles?
Earl Anthony with the Altimeter with 41, and then the 34 for Mark Roth and Walter Ray Williams Jr.
I played football at Princeton, and he came to the games, and there's no question he was proud when I did well or when the team did well. But you got both sides of that. There are many famous stories, of games that he left at halftime.
What was the score at halftime?
17-0 Brown, and then Princeton came back to win 28-23. Big second half comeback, right?
Mark has certain mathematical gifts, but not nearly as much as those other fellows. Mark's main talent is art.
Can you tell me a little bit about the pictures that you drew in this book?
Helen's my sister. She's a writer.
And what did you do for the book?
I drew the pictures for that book. That's my sister Helen.
And who's this handsome guy down here at the bottom?
That's me down there. This is the Abyssinian cat looking up. It says over there too. I think it's looking up at a spider. That must be my second favorite picture. Yeah, my first is the cats chasing the beams.
Can you tell me why that's your favorite picture?
Because I like to see cats play with something. It's fun to watch cats playing around with something.
Joseph has perfect pitch. The first time I knew that was one day when he was about 5. He was sitting on the washing machine, and he was hardly talking at that time. He maybe said 2-word sentences once or twice a day. And one day when he was sitting on the washing machine, while it was in its spin cycle, he said, "The washing machine is playing B." Well, I never heard a long sentence like that, and I had no idea he had perfect pitch. So I ran to the piano, and sure enough, that cycle was playing B. So I began to ping things in the environment.
G. D. F. B. F sharp.
He's got it.
Just to name a few.
Perfect pitch among autistic savants is very common. About 1 out of 10,000 persons in the general population has perfect pitch. Among autistic persons, it's much higher than that. And among autistic savants, it's nearly universal, which is I'm not sure what the reason is, but it's very prominent among autistic savants.
No one knows how your brain or my brain works. There are theories about it. We can name the parts of the brain, but no one has a clue as to how even a single neuron works. And there are 9 billion neurons in the brain, not to mention billions of other kinds of cells. But we just don't know how it works. But to me, the best way to explain the autistic savant's skills is by thinking of our ability to concentrate. You and I have the ability to concentrate on a small subject matter, or to broaden our scope. Now, autistic individuals do not have the capacity for broadening their attention. They are locked into the very narrow focus. They can focus on a couple of numbers and multiply them or get the square roots of them or whatever they want to do because they are not distracted by the kinds of intrusive thoughts that the rest of us are subject to. The human brain, in the normal individual at least, has been engineered so that these intrusive thoughts, which are important for survival, can take precedence over what's going on at the digital level, you might say. And the autistic individuals have a brain impairment of some sort which causes them to concentrate on the details, on the figures, rather than the ground, rather than the perspective. They don't have much perspective, but they can deal with the details with great fidelity. They can focus on the trees but not see the forest, in other words.
Some of the things that you see in the movie, Kmart, the salt shaker, Judge Wapner at 4 o'clock, those kinds of things, some of that is autism. And is intrinsic in autism itself. So you have to separate out some of those things that you see in Raymond Babbitt are because of his autism, and some of those are his savant abilities. And what you see in him is savant abilities grafted onto autism. But there are trade-offs, an emotional trade-off often. You see kind of a flatness of emotion. In many of these people, they're not able to think abstractly. They can think very concretely in terms of all kinds of things that they can remember, objects, but when you ask them what is happiness or what is love, many of them have trouble conceptualizing. And by the way, that's a left brain kind of ability that they don't have.
Are you close to your brother Kevin?
Yeah.
Now Kevin was telling me that occasionally you'll spell his name.
Yeah. Kevin, right?
I think the question of how people like Peter show affection is one that's a little bit hard for us to understand, and to some degree, my experience with the film taught me a lot about how Peter at least reacts or feels about things, because I think really what it comes down to is they have a different set of rules. In some sense, I don't think he feels any differently than you or I feel, but the way he expresses it, it gets refracted, it gets deflected, and it comes out some way that's different.
Autistic children are usually stiff, are often rigid. They just don't want to be touched. They seem to be aversive to touch, whereas most children love touch, especially a loving touch. Most of us love touch that's a loving touch. They just seem to be so touch aversive.
I like having you for my big brother.
Yeah.
Peter is one of the autistic savants that is actually quite high functioning, quite able to do things on his own. It hasn't always been that way. When he was very young, he was totally non-communicative with the family, with my mom. And I remember when my father was in the service, he was in the Army, and we moved around a lot. And so one of the concerns was always, when you go to the new place, is there going to be somewhere that can accommodate him? Is there some special learning capability or special school? And when we went to Japan, we moved to Japan, it was actually a very small Army post, and there wasn't special school. He had to go to the regular high school, quote unquote. And so he took classes that he could do. I mean, they weren't leading toward any kind of degree, but he was good with languages, so he took Spanish, he took French, he took Japanese. He was good with, art, so he took art. He took a series of classes that he could take, but he went to the high school every day that everyone else went to. And that was very good for him. I mean, it was different for him, but it was very, very good. He really grew in that environment. And in fact, when it came time for his age group to graduate, they let him go through the graduation ceremony and gave him a certificate. And so over time, he has really grown. And when we moved back from Japan after that experience, he was then done with school in that sense. And we came back and we lived on an Army post in Washington, D.C. And he went back to being in the house, watching television, and he was really regressing socially again. And my oldest sister got him to come to Princeton and got him involved in some programs. And he got to learn. He started to learn about work, and he started to, got into a living and learning environment, and gradually has been able to get himself into a situation where now he lives on his own. With another mentally handicapped individual. They cook their own meals, they take care of themselves, he has a job. He lives in Princeton, my parents live in D.C., I live in New York. He's on his own, and he's living his own life. Now, he's got an enormous network of people where he works at the Princeton University Library who take wonderful care of him. But he's made his own life, and he's very proud of that too.
And what kind of tasks do you do in a day?
If I check email first thing, then process the morning papers that come in and deliver them to the Social Science Reference Center and, of course, the staff lounge. New York Times, the staff lounge, so everybody can read it, right? Oh, study rooms on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Also, at the pre-binding plating living, also the shipment books, the clipping and scanning rush books and bound volumes, and put a call number label decal on it, and then heat it up, and so it can stick.
Raymond, Ted Kluszewski.
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 Kluszewski, Ted Kluszewski. Big clue, first base.
He played for Cincinnati.
Of course, he was traded for Dee Fondy, 1957. Lifetime batting average, 298.
Great books he reads,
big
huh?
clue.
Reads and remembers whatever he gets his hands on.
What you see in Raymond Babbitt is an autistic savant, and it's important when you view the movie to realize that not all savants are autistic. Only about half are actually autism, and not all autistic persons are savants. About 1 out of 10. So the term savant syndrome is more accurate than autistic savant because it incorporates more than just autistic persons.
Rain Man has done more for the field of autism than all of us put together around the world have done in 25 years with one movie. You can walk into, at least in the United States, almost any group, and you will not have to say what autism is. They'll say, oh yeah, I saw Rain Man. Although Rain Man is only one person in a large, long spectrum of autism, at least they've met Rain Man.
I think the film has made a tremendous advance in our willingness to accept the fact that there are people with impairments in their mental abilities that are not their own faults. And they have peculiar habits, peculiar behaviors that they have no ability to correct. And I think that Rain Man goes a long way toward making it clear to the public that they need to have some compassion and understanding for individuals who are unfortunate enough to have a disability, whether it be autism or retardation or cerebral palsy or some other disability. I do think it has had that beneficial effect.
When you have a brother like Peter, you learn you got to live by his rules. They change a little bit over time, but they're pretty solid. They're pretty immutable. You enjoy just the pure, joy and great feeling that you get from him in his way when you're with him, when you go bowling with him, when he wants to do things with you, and you plug into that just the way you plug into somebody saying I love you or giving you a hug. It's just a different set of rules.
And the Oscar goes to Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man, and they erupted.
And then what happened? What did Dustin Hoffman do when he got his award?
Yeah, I said thanks, Peter and Kevin, right? You guys saw that tape of the Oscars from that year.
And were you happy that he mentioned you?
Yeah.